For many people, Red Lobster declaring bankruptcy was somewhat abrupt. It's a company that's been around since the late 1960s and has been nothing but a tremendous success for over half a century. But over the last few years, the corporation has traded hands, and in a relatively short amount of time, has brought this once extremely profitable company to the edge of catastrophe. Now it's left with an uncertain future and a lot on the line. So how did this incredibly popular seafood chain fumble this hard, and what does the future hold for Red Lobster? Southwest of Orlando, in the central Florida city Lakeland, two colleagues, Charlie Woodsby and Bill Darden, would start a small seafood restaurant called Red Lobster Inn. It was 1968, and the two wanted to bring the Florida coastal seafood culture inland, taking inspiration in both concept and in naming from Gary's Duck Inn over in Orlando. They built this restaurant at the cost of around $330,000, or around $2.9 million today, and it had an overall capacity of 250 diners. With its distinctive nautical theming both inside and out, along with an actual lake view, servers dressed in sailor uniforms would bring you a selection of seafood, steak, and chicken. This all proved to be very popular, and the restaurant was an enormous success for the two. So much so that they sought to expand. In just 2 years, the businessmen would grow Red Lobster into 5 locations across Florida, planning even more in the years to come. However, by 1970, they caught the interest of a much larger company wanting to get into the restaurant business, General Mills. They purchased the controlling shares of the brand for an undisclosed amount, and made the two business partners employees at their new parent company. General Mills would continue the expansion. In fact, they would ramp it up enormously. In just 5 years, General Mills would construct over 145 new restaurants across 23 states around America. And by 1977, they had served over 54 million customers. The company would continue to expand their reach, opening multiple new locations every week. By this point, the brand was introducing new promotions, some of which, like offering endless crab legs, were very successful. This not only brought seafood to many inland, smaller cities around America, but did so at an affordable price. Red Lobster was a great value proposition to many, and this resulted in great sales and even more growth. General Mills would begin renovating their existing locations through the end of the 1970s, bringing in warmer wood tones and booth seating, but still keeping with the overall nautical themes throughout. Red Lobster made up the majority of sales and profits for General Mills' overall restaurant division, increasing year over year, oftentimes exceeding their sales expectations. In just 1980 alone, the brand earned over $525 million, with the average restaurant in the chain earning around $1.9 million in sales. This was an extremely profitable restaurant chain, and this success continued through the decade. They'd make their first international expansion, now opening locations in Canada as well as Japan, all while sales continued to rise domestically. Updates in both the interior and exterior were once again implemented within the chain, and by 1988, Red Lobster had surpassed the $1 billion mark across 400 locations. The brand's rise was monumental by this point, opening hundreds of restaurants and counting, along with well over $1 billion in revenue, all within just 20 years. General Mills was also on top of growing the brand and keeping it relevant, spending money to ensure their locations were still looking fresh, and focused on introducing specials to keep customers coming through the door. Red Lobster was a special night out for many, while others were regular customers, either dining out for dinner or stopping by for a seafood lunch. The early 90s saw this trend continue, with even more openings and the introduction of promotions like Lobster Fest. Over 100 million customers dined within their restaurants through 1990, and the average location was approaching $3 million in average sales. Their interiors were once again updated, making guests feel more like they were in a quaint fisherman's restaurant, a highly themed environment that now had just introduced the Cheddar Bay biscuits, complimentary and unlimited biscuits served warm and buttery before your meal. This proved to be extremely popular, and along with new dish promotions like the 30 shrimp platter, the brand was continuing its stellar performance. restaurants, it's almost hard to articulate how popular and successful this brand was. I mean, there's many reports through this time of city leaders in smaller population municipalities hoping that one day a Red Lobster would set up in their town. One article interviewing a city official saying, quote, "It seems that Red Lobster has been the holy grail of restaurantdom around here." And then later on stating that when Red Lobster comes to town, usually many others follow. The chain was now made up of over 618 locations. Overall, a fantastic and well-performing company. But a major shift in ownership was coming for the brand. General Mills had decided to spin off their restaurant business. They would do so through Darden Restaurants Inc., the company which was created by Red Lobster's original founder, Bill Darden. Bill himself passed away just a year before the split, and General Mills would go back to focusing on their core business, which was consumer food products. This was while the public Darden restaurants would take over their brands like Olive Garden, China Coast, and of course Red Lobster. But this new spin-off wasn't as exciting for investors as it may have seemed. Darden Restaurants' IPO was a bit lackluster, failing to meet share price targets, all while year-over-year sales for Red Lobster had fell slightly due to competition. By the mid-1990s, this trend continued across America, as corporately owned restaurants had flooded the marketplace, and chain restaurants became a saturated industry with only so many customers to go around. Darden would ultimately close several underperforming Red Lobster locations, and cautioned investors that a turnaround might be a slow process. They once again refurbished restaurants and slowed down the expansion efforts as a whole, all while putting a larger focus on their menu, introducing affordable dishes under $10. By the end of the 90s, things were actually turning around for the brand, finally seeing positive numbers once again. Come the early 2000s, Red Lobster was once again climbing and held quite the market position in the casual seafood space, commanding a massive 46% market share with over $2.2 billion in total sales, a record for the brand. A full bar setup was now being installed in various locations, while the brand enjoyed marginal growth over the next couple of years. The company still focused on their menu and introduced new items like the quick catch lunches, and this overall increased customer satisfaction. This is also around the time when myself and my family were coming to Red Lobster, and it really was a bit of a special occasion, something I was genuinely excited for as a kid. By 2004, they had introduced Endless Shrimp, a very popular promotion that would later become a staple for the brand as a yearly attractor for customers looking to indulge in all-you-can-eat shrimp. Again though, Darden was very careful with overexpansion, and only grew the chain by what they saw as what the market could handle. And as a result, Red Lobster had plateaued a bit, but at least it was still stable and profitable. The chain was now made up of over 690 restaurants, and under Darden's management, they brought all of their brands through the 2008 recession rather unscathed. This was accompanied by yet another new look, this one modeled after New England architecture, and begun implementation across their whole chain. "See food differently" was the clever new slogan, while a $15 four-course platter was introduced, all in an effort to stay affordable and competitive. However, Darden's golden child was no longer king, and they began shifting their focus over to Olive Garden, which was seeing much better growth and surpassing Red Lobster in both number of locations and massively in overall revenue. After a 1.7% decrease year over year, by 2014, Darden would ultimately decide to sell their brand after a few years of shareholder deliberation. In their annual report of that year, they state that, quote, "The decision to pursue a separation of businesses was not an easy one. We believe, however, that it was the right decision. As consumer demand dynamics have changed, Red Lobster's appeal to the most attractive consumer segments have declined. In addition, its prospects for the future have become much more uncertain compared to our other brands." The buyer for Red Lobster, as you might have guessed, was a private equity firm called Golden Gate Capital. They would acquire the brand for $2.1 billion, marking a symbolic end for Darden's oversight, 46 years after Bill had founded it. Golden Gate would move the newly independent company's headquarters to a downtown office complex in Orlando, all while they continued on with the chain-wide remodeling. While Golden Gate's purchase wasn't all cash offer, it was still a massive chunk of money for the firm, plus some debt. And because of this, they needed to find some extra cash out of their sale somewhat quickly. So, they started to sell off Red Lobster's large portfolio of real estate assets, since of course many of their restaurants were owned by the company. That structure typically benefits the company, because the chain as a whole is very asset rich, with a lot of long-term benefits stemming from that. But if you want cash quickly while still keeping those locations, you could also just sell those restaurants as real estate assets, bring in a whole bunch of money right away, and then just lease back those spaces to continue restaurant operations. It's called a sale leaseback, and that's exactly what Golden Gate Capital did. They explained that by doing this, it would reduce their long-term exposure to real estate markets. Not really sure what they were forecasting though, as statistically commercial real estate has only appreciated since then, but okay. They would earn over $1.5 billion by selling off nearly 500 locations across America. As a private company, we don't exactly know what their overall financial state was like, but we do know that Red Lobster continued to lose their foothold in the market, likely saw a dilution of their market share, and as a result, declined in sales. Competition in the quick service space from brands like Panera Bread and Captain D's ate away at the casual family dining market as a whole, and Red Lobster felt that pressure. Ultimately, Golden Gate Capital wouldn't stick around for much longer. They would sell the company to one of their largest investors, Thai Union, who had already bought a quarter of the brand back in 2016. They would acquire the majority shares of the corporation in 2020. The sale price wasn't disclosed, but the new owner was interesting, as Thai Union was a Thailand-based seafood supplier who was also the same company that supplied much of Red Lobster's seafood, and had been doing so for decades. But they're also, and this is important, not a restaurant company. They had no idea how to run a restaurant company in America, but their overarching influence could be felt across the company, as their prerogative was centered around cost cutting. According to CNN, Thai Union began stretching waitstaff obligations to the limit, all in an effort to save on wages, all while menu items were cut down and longtime suppliers were cut off. The quality of both the customer experience and the food itself had sharply declined, and this was all while prices were raised. I personally remember during this time 2 different instances that I've been to Red Lobster. One was in Myrtle Beach just before we filmed the rest of the abandoned Hard Rock Park, where for some reason we filmed this bit. My food there was terrible, and it was just really an overall bad experience. And then we went again when we filmed this abandoned mall. Red Lobster was literally the only restaurant in town, and the restaurant also happened to be located on the perimeter of the abandoned mall. When we went there, I was honestly shocked at how bad everything was. I barely ate my meal. I mean, it was terrible. And I definitely wasn't alone. I've seen many people have very similar experiences. Now, the pandemic and rising food and labor costs hit the company especially hard, and now they were in a uniquely bad position. Since Golden Gate Capital sold off all of their properties, and instead of paying off minor mortgages, they were now making hefty rental payments for all of their restaurants. That was fine when the company was making lots of money, but now with margins shrinking and not a lot of profit coming in, they just couldn't keep up with the rising lease payments, and as a result, struggled to stay profitable. By 2022, Red Lobster lost $22 million for Thai Union, dragging down profit for the entire company. To add even more debt to the company's bottom line, executives at Thai Union pushed to have the famous endless shrimp promotion permanently added to the menu. From their perspective, this would be a great way to bring in customers who were always drawn in by this special deal, and would also be a way for Thai Union to burn through their massive supply of excess shrimp. So it would be a win-win. Except it wasn't. Give customers an inch and they'll take a mile. People absolutely took advantage of the endless shrimp, because of course they did, and it ended up costing Red Lobster much more than originally anticipated. It certainly worked in getting customers back through the doors, but it also added even more debt to the brand, specifically losing them $11 million in just the first year since the promotion went live in early 2023. By the end of that same year, Red Lobster had lost $76 million overall. After paying off interest debt payments, some of which was from Golden Gate Capital's leveraged buyouts, the company's liquid cash reserves suddenly ran dry. In a relatively short amount of time, Red Lobster was in a dire position, with a chain of expensive-to-run and operate restaurants which were no longer turning a profit. Many locations hadn't been updated since 2014, and after burning through 5 different CEOs in just 2.5 years, there was just no cash flow in the company and little corporate direction. Over 70% of payments made by Red Lobster were late, and with a dangerously low cash reserve and an unprofitable chain as a whole, it was reported that Red Lobster was preparing to file for bankruptcy, a surprise to many who weren't familiar with the brand's recent past. On May 13, 2024, the company abruptly announced that at least 99 locations would close, and sure enough, 7 days later, on May 20th, 2024, Red Lobster had filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. In their filing, they didn't really specify their assets and liabilities publicly, instead stating they had assets between $1 billion and $10 billion and liabilities within the same range. So yeah, thanks, that's very helpful. So obviously the situation is not good, as Thai Union also claimed that they would be divesting their stake in the company by the end of 2024, with for some reason their CEO jokingly adding in a shareholder meeting that he was going to stop eating lobster. So this leaves the ownership of the brand sort of up in the air, as it's now partially owned by various private entities. The good news is that $100 million has been secured to keep operations going as normal. This is while corporate figures out a way to renegotiate leases and reduce debt. But to anyone visiting a Red Lobster lately, this decline was clearly palpable. I actually went to a Red Lobster the night of the bankruptcy filing. Actually a really surreal experience for me. I went there, of course, in preparation for this video. What I found was a tired-looking, dirty restaurant with food and drink that ranged from bad, like the shrimp fettuccine, to actually pretty good, like the salmon bowl with Brussels sprouts. The biscuits were honestly the highlight, as I'm sure it is for many, but I'm not sure if I'd ever go out of my way to visit a Red Lobster just to get those biscuits, especially when you can just buy the kits at most grocery stores. But regardless, this is putting the livelihoods of over 36,000 Red Lobster employees on the line. And when I asked our very kind and hardworking waitress on what her situation was, it was absolutely heartbreaking. Not only was she not communicated to at all by corporate, but she also found out with everyone else the morning of. She told us she's crossing her fingers that she doesn't show up one day and there's chains on the doors. Kind of like the other employees did at the other 99 locations that they suddenly closed. So now when you look back, clearly Darden knew what they were doing when they sold the brand when they did, as they're now stronger than ever. Red Lobster, meanwhile, was gutted by a private equity firm who gave them problems they didn't need, took the money, turned it around, and sold it to the next company. Thai Union had no idea what they were doing, and clearly made things much worse by devaluing their brand and saddling it with poor decisions and financial losses that were only exacerbated by the burdens the last company put on it. And it's weird to see how the story has been reported by many large outlets and publications, basically implying or reducing the story all down to just being about endless shrimp and their losses because of it. But obviously there's a lot more to it than that. So what does the future hold? Well, it's hard to say. The bankruptcy is pretty recent, and only time will tell if the company can survive on their own and who might take on the shares that Thai Union will be divesting. The board has hired a new CEO that is experienced in guiding companies out of bankruptcy, and he has put together a strategy, one that focuses on key areas like efficiency, improving corporate culture, and providing a better standard of service, among many others. It will take time to see how these ideas and strategies are implemented, and there is likely to be more cost-cutting within the company before things start to improve. But Red Lobster is a strong brand name, perhaps one of the strongest among the casual restaurant chains, and their legacy is a long and successful one. It's almost easy to forget, though, how it all started 55 years ago with just a single location in Lakeland. one that's now a fishing store, by the way. Its rise was explosive, and with the backing of a massive company like General Mills, there was no stopping its enormous growth and its immense financial success. But after being spun off and private equity coming in, its enthusiasm for a future slowed to a crawl. And I think it could be argued that entities had more interest in taking than they did growing. Ultimately, that left this longtime restaurant juggernaut drowning in an ocean of its own design.